On the evening of December 2nd, 2010, at around 7 p.m. in Melbourne, Australia, a maintenance worker made his way to the garbage room in the service area of a residential high-rise on St. Kilda Road. When he attempted to open the door, it refused to move, as if something on the other side was blocking it. After several tries, he managed to force it open slightly and, feeling uneasy, contacted the building's concierge. They returned together and reviewed the access logs before entering the room. The lighting was faint, throwing long shadows across equipment that appeared to have been moved from its usual position. Strange scuff marks were visible on the floor, and nothing looked as it should have. Near the garbage chute, the hatch at the room's entrance was not properly secured. They spotted broken debris and what looked like a faint, smeared footprint. Choosing not to enter, they left the door slightly open, recorded the time, and alerted the building manager and emergency services. Shortly afterward, access to the floor was locked down. The elevator was placed in service mode, and security sealed off the corridor. Meanwhile, residents upstairs went about their evenings, unaware that something deeply disturbing had been uncovered just below them. As the two staff members waited quietly for police to arrive, neither yet understood what lay behind that door. Phoebe Hansjack was born on May 9, 1986. From an early age, she possessed a vivid imagination, creating entire worlds as a way to express herself. Known for her warmth and friendliness, she naturally drew people in. She led an active life, loved playing basketball, and flourished in outdoor activities. The ocean became her refuge, a place where she felt calm and connected to nature, especially when spending time outdoors with friends. Yet beneath her energetic and cheerful exterior, Phoebe struggled with quiet vulnerabilities during her teenage years. She experienced emotional lows and experimented with illegal substances before later turning to alcohol to ease her anxiety. These challenges eventually led her to seek professional help through therapy and prescribed medication, hoping to restore a sense of balance. Phoebe embodied both carefree joy and deep reflection. In social settings, she was often the center of attention, smiling, engaged, and full of life. In more private moments, however, she became thoughtful and introspective. At home, she was a steady presence, loyal, selfless, and reliable. She was especially gentle and protective of her siblings, who trusted her completely. By the age of 23, Phoebe had secured a position as a front desk administrator at a salon. The position was a natural fit for her. She appreciated structure, managed her duties with ease, and connected easily with nearly everyone she met outside of work. Art became her refuge, the way she worked through her emotions and understood the world around her. To Phoebe, life's true value wasn't found in possessions but in experiences, relationships, and shared moments. She had a clear vision for her future. Phoebe was determined to travel abroad and take part in volunteer missions in India. It wasn't about sightseeing, but about making a difference, discovering purpose, and gaining meaningful life experience. She actively researched opportunities, carefully planned her journey, and was preparing to turn those plans into reality. During her school years, Phoebe wasn't remembered for popularity or flair, but for her dependability and her ability to bring people together. Her resilience was deeply rooted within herself. One of her most trusted confidants was her grandmother, someone she could speak to openly about everything: her ambitions, her fears, and even the treatments she was undergoing. Her grandmother listened without judgment and provided constant, unconditional support. Phoebe's life existed in a careful balance between outward vitality and private struggle. Her warmth and ability to connect were sincere, yet behind her smile was someone working tirelessly to stay grounded. That internal conflict influenced both her relationships and her reliance on emotional support during difficult periods. In 2009, while working as a front desk manager at a salon, Phoebe met 39-year-old events promoter Anthony Hampel. He came from a prominent Melbourne family. His father, George Hampel, was a retired Supreme Court judge, and his stepmother, Felicity Hampel, was serving as a county court judge. Anthony moved within elite social circles, carefully building connections and meticulously shaping his public image. That autumn, Phoebe moved in with him at the Belinska Apartments on St. Kilda Road, a luxury high-rise boasting more than 80 units. Round-the-clock security, a gym, pool, sauna, spa, and an on-site restaurant. It was premium real estate with apartments valued at up to $1.5 million. Their home sat on the 12th floor, offering expansive views over the city's parklands. Anthony's life centered on corporate events, networking dinners, and constant engagement with influential figures. A world defined by status, refinement, and presentation. Phoebe, by contrast, prized a simpler life. Time with friends, creative expression, and nature. As they began living together, those differences grew more pronounced. In the beginning, however, their relationship was driven by mutual attraction and curiosity. Anthony brought her into his world, but it was one shaped entirely by his own tastes and expectations. Gradually, the dynamic began to change. He started commenting on her clothing, discouraging her from spending time with certain friends, and pressuring her to conform to his high society lifestyle. According to her family and mental health professionals, Phoebe began to feel increasingly constrained and confided in those closest to her. The emotional toll continued to grow. Phoebe described feeling verbally controlled, as though her decisions were constantly questioned or redirected. She often expressed that she wanted encouragement, not limitations, and remained determined to preserve her independence. This led to a repeating pattern: brief stretches of calm and reconciliation, followed by escalating tension and conflict. Each time the strain resurfaced, Phoebe would raise the possibility of leaving. Her family was aware of those moments, as was her therapist. At one point, her grandmother gently advised that if Phoebe truly wanted to leave, she should do so calmly and on her own terms. Phoebe tried to pull away from Anthony's world, refocusing on her personal projects and attempting to establish clear boundaries. Any progress she made, however, proved short-lived. The tightly controlled environment of their apartment, paired with Anthony's high-profile social circle, created an appearance of stability that only intensified her sense of dependence. Anthony's family took a strong interest in the relationship and even suggested formalizing it legally, an idea Phoebe's family strongly resisted. For Phoebe, it was a matter of principle, the right to choose for herself, to decide whom to trust, and to live life on her own terms. In late November, Phoebe had a video call with her mother, who knew she was planning to leave Anthony. Her mother was surprised to see Phoebe still at his apartment. When asked about the state of their relationship, Phoebe silently signaled to stay quiet and avoided answering, claiming they were simply watching a movie in the other room. The following evening, the couple joined Matt and Julia Rockman for dinner. During the meal, Phoebe attempted to discuss the issues in her relationship with Julia, but Anthony quickly interrupted and changed the subject. After dinner, in the underground parking garage, a heated argument erupted. Upset, Phoebe walked away and reached out to an old friend, arranging to meet for drinks. According to that friend, they spent about an hour together at a bar in a calm, relaxed environment. During that period, Phoebe's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Anthony called her 27 times in under an hour. Feeling overwhelmed, she impulsively threw her iPhone across the street. Later that evening, Phoebe arrived at her mother's home, where they had a serious, in-depth conversation. It wasn't about salvaging the relationship, but about planning a safe way for her to leave without further conflict. Phone records later confirmed that the next morning, Phoebe returned to the apartment she shared with Anthony. What followed was a string of calls for help. She reached out to the crisis team at Alfred Hospital, as well as her doctor and therapist. During a 30-minute session with her therapist, she opened up about her substance use and the escalating tensions in her home life. She wasn't merely venting. She was actively seeking guidance on how to avoid relapse and prevent the situation from worsening. The events of December 2nd, 2010, were later reconstructed using building access logs, surveillance footage, and Anthony's own statement. He claimed he left the apartment around 8 a.m., with Phoebe still asleep at 8:45 a.m. An email was sent from her computer shortly thereafter. Over the next hour, brief periods of activity were recorded on her account. At 11:43 a.m., a fire alarm was triggered. Security cameras in the lobby and hallways showed Phoebe calmly leaving the building with her dog. There was no sign of panic or urgency. The alarm was later determined to be false. There was no scheduled drill or formal evacuation. At 11:50 a.m., Phoebe re-entered through the main entrance and took the elevator back up to her floor. That was the last time Phoebe appeared on surveillance footage that day. Around 6 p.m., Anthony returned home and immediately noticed that something was amiss. Shards of glass were scattered near the desk, likely from a broken item, and small specks of blood were visible on the keyboard and surrounding surfaces, including a stained mousepad. A torn pillowcase lay on the couch. There were no signs of forced entry at the front door or in the kitchen. Phoebe's purse, wallet, and keys were still inside, but her phone was missing. 2 used wine glasses sat on the dining table, yet there was no indication that a meal had been prepared. No plates, no silverware, nothing set out in the hallway or living room. Faint streaks on the floor ran from the desk area toward the apartment entrance. The source of the streaks and marks on the floor could not be identified. Near the front door, a large shoe print was found, significantly bigger than those typically left by maintenance or cleaning staff. At 6:51 p.m., Phoebe's father attempted to call her iPhone, but the call went straight to voicemail. Just a minute later, at 6:52 p.m., Anthony called her father, claiming he didn't know Phoebe's whereabouts and that her phone was missing from the apartment. Meanwhile, he continued communicating with friends and colleagues and placed a solo food order at 8:10 p.m. The delivery driver informed a resident that police were already present near the service corridor. Only after that did Anthony go downstairs to speak with officers, reporting that Phoebe was missing and that he had been unable to reach her. Up until that point, Anthony had neither filed a missing persons report nor contacted emergency services. The building's trash system was a vertical chute, deep and narrow, running from the upper floors down to a maintenance area in the basement. It measured roughly 130 feet in height, beginning around the 12th floor where Anthony and Phoebe lived. The chute had a heavy metal hatch with an automatic closing mechanism and a narrow opening. At the bottom, bins collected the waste. It was through this chute that Phoebe fell. The fall was devastating. She struck the metal walls on the way down before landing in one of the bins, sustaining severe injuries. Her legs and pelvis were shattered. One foot was nearly severed, and the impact caused extensive internal bleeding. Despite the severity of her injuries, medical reports confirmed that Phoebe's vital signs were still present. After the fall, she landed near one of the large trash bins. Remarkably, despite her catastrophic injuries, she managed to climb out of the container and onto the concrete floor of the garbage room. Blood trails on the floor indicated her efforts to move and orient herself. She was unable to stand because of her injuries and the significant blood loss, yet the marks showed that she repeatedly shifted positions, attempting to make her way toward the door. The room was completely dark, with no windows, and the light switch required manual activation. Phoebe relied solely on her sense of touch as she inched forward through the darkness. Eventually, Phoebe's strength gave out, and the trail of movement ceased. A pool of blood collected beneath her, marked by the imprint of her hands, evidence that she had remained conscious and was fighting to survive until the very end. The medical examiner concluded that her death was not instantaneous. She had remained alive and aware for some time after sustaining her injuries, ultimately succumbing to acute blood loss. The combination of trauma, shattered bones, ruptured blood vessels, and internal damage made long-term survival impossible, yet her body had struggled to persevere. One unsettling detail emerged during the investigation. Phoebe's jeans were found pulled down to her knees. This was inconsistent with a typical fall, where clothing usually remains in place, and this anomaly was never fully explained during the inquiry. Her final moments were spent in total isolation. The trash room was heavily soundproofed, so even if she had screamed or called for help, no one would have heard her. No residents reported noticing any unusual sounds. Essentially, Phoebe was trapped in complete darkness with no means of assistance when law enforcement arrived. Officers quickly determined the situation and prevented paramedics from approaching the body. This decision made it impossible for medical personnel to establish the exact time of death or how long Phoebe had survived after the fall. The first responding officers immediately classified the case as self-harm. In those early hours, no neighbors were interviewed, not all surveillance footage was collected, and the building's CCTV system, which automatically overwrote recordings every 48 hours, was not paused. A staff member even recommended preserving the hard drive, but that advice was ignored. Later, the hard drive disappeared entirely, along with any data that might have revealed Phoebe's final movements inside the apartment. Critical forensic procedures were skipped. The used wine glasses weren't collected or analyzed. No fingerprints were taken, bloodstains went unexamined, and the blood spatter patterns were not properly documented. No effort was made to trace the source of the shattered glass. A large shoe print near the front door wasn't photographed or recorded. Door frames and windows weren't tested for trace evidence. Key electronic devices, including laptops and a desktop computer, were never seized and remained accessible and unsecured. Phoebe's phone was never recovered, and Anthony's devices were also not confiscated. As a result, valuable digital information, activity logs, drafts, and unsaved notes, was lost. Building access that evening was only loosely controlled. While an entry fob was technically required, anyone accompanied by a resident could bypass security without leaving a digital record. Law enforcement never attempted to reconstruct Anthony's potential visitor activity that night. Guest access logs from the front desk were never requested, nor were they cross-referenced with elevator or key card records. Staff observed that some visitors could have entered without leaving any trace, even as the service area remained secured. The apartment itself was never fully sealed for a proper forensic investigation. Anthony continued to move freely, taking calls and receiving deliveries, introducing secondary contamination that disrupted microscopic evidence and compromised the reliability of any later reconstruction. Officers did not record the condition of Anthony's clothing and shoes upon arrival, nor did they collect control samples to compare with the unidentified footprints inside the apartment. The self-harm theory was established alarmingly quickly, within just a few hours, and official statements began to heavily favor this explanation. The case files offered no clear justification for such a rapid conclusion. Even without a note, documentation of planning, or any evidence of intent, the case was swiftly categorized. By the end of the first week, investigators lacked a coherent timeline of movements or actions. Yet the notion that Phoebe had voluntarily climbed into the chute was widely accepted as fact, despite the absence of solid evidence. This assumption became the foundation for all subsequent conclusions, making it exceedingly difficult to re-examine the case. The official finding later classified the incident as a tragic accident influenced by substances. Phoebe's toxicology report showed a blood alcohol level of roughly 0.16%, about 3 times the legal driving limit in most states, along with traces of 1 or 2 sleep aids. The prevailing theory suggested that she had cut herself on glass inside the apartment, become disoriented, picked up a bag of trash, opened the chute hatch, and somehow ended up inside. However, this explanation was met with skepticism by Phoebe's family and independent experts. First, the design of the chute hatch made that scenario highly unlikely. The opening was narrow, around 8 inches wide, with no handles and an automatic closing mechanism. Even volunteers attempting to replicate the movement under supervision struggled and required assistance. Second, the pattern of Phoebe's injuries was more consistent with a fall in which her arms were at her sides, rather than raised above her head. As would be expected if she had entered voluntarily, no fingerprints belonging to Phoebe were found on the chute hatch or surrounding surfaces, an important inconsistency with the theory that she climbed in herself. It was also confirmed that she had not taken out the trash that day, further undermining the idea that the fall occurred while disposing of garbage. These points significantly challenged the official account. One particularly troubling detail involved the position of Phoebe's clothing. Normally, when someone enters a narrow vertical shaft on their own, clothing stays in place or gets caught around the hips. However, reenactments by independent experts suggested a different scenario. If a limp body is pushed through the hatch by 2 people while the lid is forcibly held open, the jeans can catch at the knees, restricting leg movement and making it easier to push the body downward. That scenario matched the condition in which Phoebe was found. Linear bruises were present on her forearms and wrists. Police suggested these were caused by striking the walls of the chute during the fall. However, independent experts retained by Phoebe's family concluded that the marks were consistent with being forcefully gripped. Despite this, no thorough investigation was ever conducted to explore this theory, such as analyzing grip positions or defensive injury patterns. The official explanation involving alcohol and sleep aids also conflicted with the practicalities of independently accessing the chute in an impaired state, where coordination and motor skills would have been significantly compromised. Operating a spring-loaded hatch, holding it open, and maneuvering into it would have been extremely difficult. Independent experts confirmed that attempting these actions sequentially under such impairment would have been nearly impossible. Forensic trace evidence showed no handprints or grip marks on the inner edge of the hatch or the nearby wall, areas where anyone attempting to climb in on their own would logically brace themselves. Additionally, the body position required for self-entry, with arms raised overhead, did not match the angle of the initial impact, as indicated by Phoebe's injuries. While the glass injury might account for the blood found in the apartment, it did nothing to explain the absence of her fingerprints on the hatch mechanism. Forensic pathologists supporting the accidental fall theory relied on her toxicology report and the absence of classic struggle indicators, such as skin under the nails or torn hair, to justify their conclusion. Critics pointed out that the flawed initial investigation, with missing fingerprints, unchecked areas, and uncollected samples, meant that no violent scenario could be confidently dismissed. Determining the time of death was also a major problem, due to the circumstances and delayed medical intervention. Experts could not accurately align biological indicators with a specific timeline, and in cases like this, knowing the exact time of death is often crucial for confirming or ruling out certain versions of events. In Phoebe's case, that critical window was lost. Anthony's behavior in the immediate hours and days following the incident drew attention for troubling reasons. Officer Justin O'Brien observed a disconnect between Anthony's display of grief and the physical signs typically associated with crying. There were no visible tears, no redness in the eyes, and no indication of a runny nose. When it came time to give a statement, Anthony insisted on typing it himself, claiming he could type quickly. During this process, his emotional fluctuations ceased entirely. He appeared calm, focused, and composed. Meanwhile, someone from his social circle alerted investigators to another inconsistency online. Anthony behaved as if everything were normal, yet in front of visitors, he would adopt a visibly mournful demeanor, seemingly adjusting his emotions to suit the audience. When Phoebe's grandmother visited the apartment, she was struck by how staged it seemed. Nearly all of Phoebe's belongings were gone, leaving only a few carefully arranged photos of the couple visible to her family, giving the impression of a deliberately curated portrayal of their relationship. Phoebe's friends also reported feeling pressured. One friend, Ellie, received an email from Anthony asking her to vouch for the loving nature of his relationship with Phoebe and to share that narrative with others. Ellie refused, stating that she couldn't speak on Phoebe's behalf and that Anthony's claims did not reflect the truth. Around the same time, a colleague of Phoebe's named Christo began frequently appearing at the building's concierge desk. He often brought snacks and repeatedly suggested that Phoebe had been struggling with severe depression, claiming she was beyond help. These visits continued for roughly 2 weeks. Staff members later described the interactions as feeling like an attempt to influence their perception of the events. Anthony's personal life outside his relationship with Phoebe also drew scrutiny. A colleague, whom he had portrayed as strictly professional, appeared in photos and messages indicating a more intimate connection. Phoebe's circle did not judge this morally, but saw it as a potential distraction that could have influenced his focus or behavior. During arguments and periods of separation from Phoebe, Anthony was surrounded by a network of influential people, relatives, business associates, and close friends, who acted as a protective shield. They provided legal counsel, promoted a narrative favorable to him, and worked to block uncomfortable questions from Phoebe's family and friends. This appeared to be a deliberate effort to control the story and suppress alternative explanations, highlighting the clear imbalance in resources and influence. Any subsequent investigation was effectively conducted under conditions advantageous to Anthony, making it far more difficult to challenge the initial findings or push for a comprehensive review of the case. Phoebe's parents and grandfather, however, refused to remain silent. Her grandfather even went so far as to conduct a series of physical tests on the trash chute himself. The findings were compiled into a formal report and submitted directly to the coroner. Simultaneously, Phoebe's parents requested a second, full-scale forensic sweep of the apartment, but their request was denied. Authorities cited earlier investigative decisions and argued that any subsequent examination would likely be compromised by contamination. The family formally documented their objections and appealed to higher-ranking officials, urging a reevaluation of the initial response and the scope of evidence collection. Their efforts followed strictly procedural channels. They filed motions requesting expanded forensic analysis, petitions to preserve digital evidence, and formal inquiries directed at building security and maintenance personnel. The family also compiled a detailed timeline of events and submitted it to investigators, asking that it be considered alongside alternative theories. Additionally, they took steps to raise awareness, alerting stakeholders to key gaps in the investigation. They pressed for meetings with department leadership and requested reassessments of specific investigative procedures, but their efforts were met with form letter responses that reaffirmed the adequacy of the original inquiry, citing the preliminary conclusion: an accidental death influenced by impairment. By the time the case reached the coroner's court, Phoebe's parents and grandfather had compiled an extensive case file. This file included the results of independent chute tests, communications with the property management company, police correspondence regarding attempts to access digital accounts, and a growing list of missing or lost evidence. Their core argument was straightforward: the case was incomplete and should not be closed with so many inconsistencies, oversights, and unanswered questions. The coroner's inquest represented the family's final opportunity to seek formal acknowledgement that Phoebe's death was not merely a tragic accident. Judge Peter White spent several months reviewing the evidence, hearing from experts, police representatives, attorneys, and the family. He faced a central question: what actually happened in December 2010? Was it self-inflicted, a tragic accident, or a criminal act? The official forensic pathologist maintained that Phoebe's death resulted from a fatal combination of alcohol and sleeping medication, a conclusion that aligned conveniently with both law enforcement and Anthony's family. This explanation provided a straightforward narrative that avoided examining the possibility of third-party involvement. Phoebe's family presented counter-evidence, including results from physical reenactments of the chute scenario. Their attorney, Jamaican, argued that the physical evidence indicated interference by another person. However, the judge dismissed these claims, acknowledging significant flaws in the initial investigation, but asserting that they did not alter the core finding. In his view, Phoebe's death was deemed a tragic accident rather than an intentional act, bringing the case to a close. No criminal investigation was reopened for the family, and this decision carried further repercussions. Most notably, it prevented them from seeking international assistance to access digital data in the United States. For example, Gmail records could not be released because there was no legal determination of a crime. Years later, when the family finally obtained partial access to Phoebe's email account, they encountered a frustrating reality. Many messages had already been permanently deleted. Anthony acted quickly, filing a claim with Phoebe's superannuation fund to request a death benefit payout, citing their domestic partnership. His father, George Hampel, a retired Supreme Court judge from Victoria, submitted a sworn declaration supporting the claim, falsely stating that the relationship had lasted longer than it actually had. In the end, Anthony received roughly $113,000, despite strong objections from Phoebe's family. He later transferred the funds to her brothers, but the gesture did little to ease tensions between the families. For Phoebe's loved ones, the coroner's ruling offered no real closure. It only reinforced what they had long feared, that the truth had been obscured by legal formalities and the influence of the Hampel family. Once the legal proceedings concluded, a new conflict arose over who had the right to make decisions regarding Phoebe's remains. Anthony refused to identify her body, leaving that heartbreaking responsibility to her parents. At the same time, his stepmother, County Court Judge Felicity Hampel, told Phoebe's mother that Anthony should be recognized as her next of kin, a statement that left the family stunned. To Phoebe's family, It felt like an attempt to exclude them from decisions about their own daughter. What followed was a painful and deeply symbolic outcome. There were not one, but two farewell ceremonies. Phoebe's parents held a service at a former monastery along the river, where friends and family who had known her for years gathered to share memories of her childhood, education, and dreams. The atmosphere was quiet, heartfelt, and filled with sorrow. Anthony and his family held a separate memorial at a yacht club, displaying large portraits of the couple and delivering speeches about love and a bright future. To many of Phoebe's friends, the event felt staged, omitting the real history, the arguments, the emotional tension. Neither Anthony nor his family attended the cremation or the placement of Phoebe's ashes. Later, subtle signs began to emerge, suggesting that not everyone close to Anthony fully accepted the official story. His sister, Chrissy, became involved in a high-profile investigation related to banned substances. While she avoided formal charges, she posted a cryptic message on social media. "My only hope is that one day the truth comes out." Though vague, the words carried weight. For Phoebe's parents, the post felt like quiet confirmation. Evidence that even within the Hampel family, not everyone believed the matter was truly resolved. Time passed, but Anthony's name would resurface in connection with another tragedy. In June 2018, 25-year-old Bailey Schneider died under circumstances that eerily mirrored what had occurred years earlier. She was a vibrant young woman from Melbourne. She was outgoing and deeply connected to her family and friends. Not long before her death, she had confided that her relationship with Anthony had reached a breaking point and that she was ready to end it for good. On the morning of June 24th, Bailey Schneider was at home, texting on her phone while her parents stepped out to run errands. When they returned, they discovered her on the kitchen floor near a cabinet, with a looped cord around her neck. There was no high anchor point nearby, and the arrangement appeared unusual. Police quickly classified the death as self-harm, but Bailey's family immediately had doubts. She was tall, around 5 feet 10 inches, and there were no fixtures in the room that could have supported a conventional hanging. Authorities also failed to secure or examine the phones during the critical early hours, and later it became clear that some data had disappeared. Investigators never reconstructed how the loop could have tightened in that confined space. Independent experiments conducted later suggested that such a setup would have been extremely difficult, if not impossible, to carry out alone without significant force or assistance. None of these findings, however, were reflected in the official reports. The investigation stretched on for more than a year and ultimately ended the same way, once again ruled as self-inflicted harm, this time for Bailey's family. To many, it felt like a second devastating blow to young women connected to the same man. Both had reportedly told loved ones they planned to end their relationships shortly before their deaths, and both were discovered under circumstances that raised serious questions. In each case, police conducted only surface-level investigations, critical digital evidence disappeared, and both times the official conclusion was identical. The official account claimed the victim had taken her own life. Yet the stories of Phoebe, Hans Jack, and Bailey Schneider became intertwined in the public consciousness. Was it mere coincidence, or did a pattern emerge? One in which key evidence vanished too quickly and a predetermined narrative was accepted before all possibilities were thoroughly explored? To this day, Phoebe's parents and Bailey's loved ones have no clear answers. The truth remains elusive. What remains for them is unresolved grief and the name Anthony, connecting both tragedies in a way that continues to provoke questions. If you found this case fascinating, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. We post crime case videos every night. Until next time, stay sharp, stay vigilant. This video explores the unsettling case of Taylor Pomaski, a 29-year-old woman whose abrupt disappearance in 2021 sent shockwaves through Texas. What began as a routine missing person case quickly evolved into a chilling mystery involving a former NFL star, a volatile relationship, and a devastating conclusion no one anticipated. There were no cries for help, No neighbors noticed anything unusual. No alarms were triggered, just a brief backyard fire that flared up and died down before daylight. Taylor Pomaski was last seen at her home in Spring, Texas, during a low-key gathering. The night appeared uneventful. What happened next would fracture her family, weigh heavily on the community, and quietly launch one of Harris County's most meticulous homicide investigations in recent years. Taylor had been in a relationship with Kevin Ware Jr., a former NFL player, for several months. Neighbors noted the couple mostly kept to themselves. Friends and family sensed the tension. They could see it, even if they didn't know just how serious things had become. It all unfolded on Sunday, April 25th, 2021. Guests arrived that evening for what was meant to be a relaxed night of music and drinks. Attendees recalled moments of laughter, shouting, and a particularly intense argument between Taylor and Ware. She appeared visibly distressed. One guest noted she seemed eager to leave but never did. Another claimed she had been locked in a room for a period of time. By midnight, several guests had already departed. Taylor was never seen again. Her car remained parked in the driveway. Inside the house were her belongings, her purse, phone, and dog, all untouched. No one dialed 911. No missing persons report was filed for weeks. It wasn't a scream that drew attention. There was only silence. Taylor's texts stopped getting replies. She stopped calling her mom, something she never missed. Days passed, and her messages remained unread. By May, her out-of-state parents had already contacted the police. It had been a week without any word from their daughter. The initial report was straightforward. A 29-year-old woman had vanished after April 25th, last seen at a residence on Stallion Brook Lane. What happened wasn't immediately clear. Officers visited the home to conduct a welfare check. At first glance, nothing appeared out of the ordinary. No blood, no forced entry, no indication that Taylor had packed up and left voluntarily. People don't just vanish into thin air in springtime. Located just north of Houston, the area is a wide suburban stretch filled with modest brick homes and neatly maintained lawns. It's typically quiet during the week, but that calm can be deceptive. In neighborhoods like this, people do notice when someone goes missing, but it often takes someone speaking up for it to be officially reported. Initially, police assumed Taylor had left on her own. Not only was her physical well-being uncertain, but several people had voiced concerns about her rocky relationship. Investigators reviewed her previous police interactions, and one incident stood out. Just weeks before the gathering, a report had been filed describing a domestic dispute. She had confided in a friend that she was afraid. She never filed an official report. One of the earliest clues that puzzled investigators was the complete lack of digital activity. No bank transactions, no cell tower pings, no social media logins. Nothing. It was as if she had gone completely offline. In today's world, that kind of disappearance is rarely accidental. The initial timeline was murky. The last confirmed sighting of her was between 10:30 p.m. and midnight. No one recalled seeing her leave the house. There were no records of rideshare requests or outgoing calls. Either the area was too dark that night, or the neighborhood security cameras weren't functioning. Police canvassed the area. Neighbors only remembered hearing shouting and loud music. But then, one woman mentioned something unexpected. She recalled seeing smoke coming from the backyard that night. It looked like a small fire, and she assumed they were just burning trash. She hadn't mentioned it to anyone before. It was a simple statement, but the police made note of it. When investigators returned to the house, they conducted a second walkthrough. This time, they used luminol in key areas like the kitchen, hallway, and the entrance to the backyard. Nothing immediately stood out. There were no signs of rapid bleeding, blood pooling, or drag marks, but something still felt off. The bathroom looked unusually clean. The floor grout had been freshly bleached, yet there was no record of a professional cleaning service. Rather than easing concerns, the absence of evidence only deepened them. It raised even more questions. Who was the last person Taylor spoke to? Who stayed after the gathering ended? And why would someone thoroughly clean the bathroom floor the day after a guest disappeared? Investigators began examining Taylor's circle. Who had been at the house that night, who left early, and who had a history with the law. As expected, investigators focused on one individual who seemed connected to everyone involved. Still, from a legal standpoint, it remained a missing person case. There was no body, no confirmed crime scene, and no witnesses to explain what had occurred. All they had was the disappearance of a young woman into the night. While Taylor Pomaski was alive, the police might have recognized the full pattern, but that clarity came too late. Over the 6 weeks leading up to her disappearance, friends, former colleagues, and even distant relatives noticed subtle but steady changes in her behavior. She became slow to respond to texts and began canceling lunch plans without explanation. When she did reply, her tone was brief, detached, and non-committal. Investigators reviewing her messages discovered several deleted conversations, but what remained revealed enough. Taylor was under a great deal of stress at home. She spoke in vague terms, saying things like, "It's just been intense," or "maybe we're figuring things out." On at least 2 occasions, she admitted she was scared, but never provided specifics. Notably, she never filed a formal complaint. There were no restraining orders or protective measures in place. However, she did make a late-night phone call to a friend on March 28th, about 4 weeks before she vanished. The call lasted just under 5 minutes. That friend later recalled that Taylor spoke in a whisper and seemed disoriented. During that brief conversation, Taylor reportedly said, "If something happens to me, please remember this." She didn't elaborate further, and the call ended quickly. At the time, Taylor's name was already in the police system due to a previous incident. On April 7th, the Harris County Sheriff's Office received a call reporting a domestic dispute. Records show officers responded to the same Stallion Brook Lane address. When they arrived, they found a verbal altercation but no visible injuries or evidence of physical violence. Taylor declined to press charges and refused to provide a written statement. Following standard procedure, the officers left without taking further action. The report was filed and permanently archived. In the days following that incident, Taylor's presence in public noticeably declined. She used to post on Instagram about once a week, but then everything went quiet. Her work attendance became erratic, and she even missed an important civil court appointment, unusual for someone her coworkers described as punctual and dependable. There wasn't a single major red flag, but a series of subtle signs added up. Later, when investigators examined her emails and phone activity, they discovered a recurring draft message in her Gmail account. The message had been opened and edited multiple times in late April. The subject line read, "In case you need to know." Inside the email, one line stood out, "I didn't fall off the radar." The rest of the message was blank, except for the final sentence, "They pushed me." Digital forensic analysts couldn't retrieve earlier versions of the draft or verify if it had ever been sent. The message remained in her account at the time of her disappearance, never deleted, never transmitted. Police brought in behavioral analysts to assess Taylor's risk factors. Based on the available records, her abrupt social withdrawal, vague mentions of fear, growing isolation, and missed appointments placed her in a high-risk category for domestic abuse. This evaluation came only after she vanished. When investigators interviewed her friends, a consistent pattern emerged. Nearly all of them, despite not knowing one another, shared similar accounts. Taylor would express something concerning, only to immediately minimize or dismiss it. She consistently downplayed, normalized, and reinterpreted her fears. Another person noted in their statement that Taylor once said he scared her at times, but she laughed it off, insisting she was just being dramatic. About a week before the party, Taylor had a more candid phone conversation with a former roommate. According to the transcript, Taylor admitted she was considering leaving but needed more time to figure things out. She didn't want to make things worse by acting too soon. Then came the party. Investigators later emphasized one crucial point. Multiple people had heard Taylor express concerns, but none of those warning signs ever translated into concrete, actionable steps. Other than Taylor herself, no one truly understood how serious the situation had become. By the time the welfare check was conducted, she had already been missing for nearly 2 weeks. As investigators dug deeper into her personal relationships and digital activity, a pattern became clear. Taylor Pomaski hadn't simply vanished. It wasn't until after she was gone that people realized she had been slowly deteriorating for weeks. Taylor was officially reported missing more than 10 days after she was last seen. May 9, 2021, Mother's Day, was when her parents finally contacted the Harris County authorities. After over a week of unanswered calls and messages, their concern escalated. Taylor was never one to go silent, but on that day she did. There were no messages, phone calls, or even a social media post for her mother. That silence prompted the first call to the local welfare office. According to the official incident report, 2 patrol officers were dispatched to Taylor's listed address in Spring, Texas. The house was locked, and her car was still parked outside. There were no signs of forced entry. When officers contacted the homeowner, they were told Taylor had left on foot several days earlier and hadn't returned. But when pressed for details, what she was wearing, when exactly she left, and where she was headed, the responses were vague. The visit was logged as a non-criminal welfare check, and the officers departed. It would take another 5 days before the Harris County Sheriff's Office officially entered Taylor's name into the National Missing Persons Database. While the delay wasn't illegal, it severely hindered the investigation. By the time authorities began canvassing the neighborhood, time-sensitive evidence, like surveillance footage from nearby homes, businesses, and traffic cameras, had already been erased. By midday, the Missing Persons Unit had elevated the case's priority, but it was still treated as a standard adult disappearance. This classification restricted the level of resources available. There was no Amber Alert, no coordinated search effort, and no formal interviews beyond close friends and family. Internally, a few detectives voiced concerns. Taylor had no prior history of going missing, wasn't involved in any pending legal issues, and her bank account activity had come to a complete halt. Taylor's phone hadn't been used since April 25th, and it wasn't connecting to any cell towers, suggesting it was either powered off, damaged, or placed somewhere without signal access. This wasn't just unusual, it was complete silence. Still, no procedural thresholds had been crossed. As an adult, Taylor had the legal right to go off the grid, and in Texas, like in many states, adults can disappear voluntarily unless there's clear evidence of foul play. That changed when investigators reviewed the body cam footage from the April 7th domestic call, 18 days before the party. Taylor appears briefly in the video. She speaks softly, stands rigidly, and avoids eye contact with the responding officers. When one deputy asks her directly if she feels safe, she pauses before quietly nodding, saying nothing more. She chose not to file a report. The man involved in the dispute remained mostly out of frame during the officer's visit. That same night, the case was closed. Watching the footage again, this time with the knowledge of her disappearance, gave it a different weight. What once seemed like a minor domestic disagreement now appeared to be a missed red flag. In May, investigators obtained a warrant to access Taylor's phone and Google search history. They discovered her final recorded search occurred on April 24th, just 1 day before she went missing. What to pack if you have to leave quickly? The query had been typed, but never submitted. The search and the case remained open. That small detail carried weight. It suggested she was either preparing to leave quickly or believed she might need to. The total absence of digital activity after her disappearance only made the case harder to solve. Investigators knew that even when adults go off the grid, they usually leave behind some kind of digital footprint, whether it's purchases, ride requests, or passive GPS signals. But Taylor left nothing. Her email remained unopened. There were no password reset attempts, no evidence her name had been linked to a new SIM card. It was complete silence. One neighbor, while canvassing the area, mentioned something odd in the days following the party. Taylor's dog, normally kept indoors, had been roaming unattended in the backyard. This neighbor lived on the west side of Stallion Brook Lane and assumed the owners were simply away for the weekend. On its own, that small detail didn't raise suspicion. But when all those small details were placed into a single timeline, the narrative shifted. The issue was that by the time detectives began piecing it all together, critical evidence had already vanished. Trash had been collected twice, and surveillance footage from the only nearby gas station had already been overwritten. Taylor's recent call history revealed several numbers that were now disconnected or reassigned. Investigators issued subpoenas for all cell phone activity within a 500-meter radius of her last known location between 9 p.m. and 3 a.m. in April. Processing that volume of data would take weeks. In a later internal memo, one detective wrote, "We didn't miss the window. We didn't know there was a window." By June, the case was officially reclassified from a voluntary disappearance to one involving suspicious circumstances. With the case reclassified, more resources were brought in: homicide liaisons, forensic experts, and expanded access to digital surveillance data. Still, there was no physical crime scene, no blood, no weapon, and no confession. What they had was a missing woman, an inconsistent statement, and a growing suspicion that something irreversible had already occurred. By June 2021, the language in internal memos reflected that shift. Taylor Pomaski's case was no longer treated as a missing person investigation. Despite the absence of a body, it was now officially considered a suspected homicide. This shift wasn't sparked by a confession or a witness. It came from what the evidence didn't show. The first major step was to revisit the home where Taylor was last seen. Although it had already been checked in early May, detectives returned for a more detailed second search. The initial search was routine visual inspection, consent to enter, and general observations. No immediate signs of a crime were found. But new digital records confirmed that Taylor hadn't used her phone or accessed any of her accounts since April 25th. Combined with mounting behavioral concerns, this prompted the sheriff's office to authorize a forensic team to conduct a more focused examination of the property. The objective was precise. Investigators were instructed to look for chemical residues, accelerants, biological traces, or any alterations to the structure inconsistent with typical wear and tear. They weren't expecting something obvious. They were searching for something that had been deliberately and thoroughly wiped away. Their first focus was the master bathroom. The grout lines in the shower showed signs of being aggressively scrubbed. Chemical reagent tests revealed traces of oxidizing agents consistent with strong bleach or ammonia-based cleaners. That alone wasn't unusual. Many people use such products. However, environmental samples taken from the lower seams of the bathroom tiles contained microscopic remnants of organic material. Later lab analysis confirmed the presence of human blood proteins. The DNA matched Taylor, only trace amounts, invisible to the eye, hidden in the porous surfaces that even bleach couldn't fully clean. It wasn't enough to definitively prove a homicide occurred there, but it was sufficient to reclassify the site as potentially connected to foul play. Prompted by a neighbor's report of a small fire on the night of April 25th, investigators conducted a similar forensic sweep of the backyard. Initially, it seemed unremarkable. Fire pits are common in Texas yards, and outdoor burning isn't unusual. But this time, it mattered. Investigators collected soil samples from a scorched patch near the property line for further analysis. Despite recent rainfall, the vegetation in the burned area hadn't fully regrown, allowing forensic teams to extract soil samples for testing. Lab analysis revealed the presence of polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, PAHs, byproducts of burning organic material. More critically, the soil contained chemical markers consistent with the combustion of synthetic fibers, commonly found in clothing and household fabrics. Elevated levels of calcium phosphate were also detected, a compound typically released when bone or tissue is incinerated. While these findings didn't definitively prove a body had been burned, they effectively ruled out the possibility of ordinary trash being set on fire. The evidence strongly suggested that something biological had been burned. However, the amount of material collected wasn't sufficient to identify its exact origin. There were no intact fragments of bone, tissue, or teeth, but the timing, combined with the lack of any reported burn activity or permits from the homeowner, indicated that this was no ordinary backyard fire. Forensic analysts then turned their attention to carpet fibers taken from the hallway leading from the bathroom to the back door, sending them to a separate lab for examination. The carpet consisted of 2 layers, one appearing recently installed, and the other older, hidden beneath. Embedded in the foam padding of the lower layer were aged fibers containing blood markers that matched Taylor's DNA profile. Though not visible to the eye and not present in large amounts, It was enough to confirm her presence. And something more. No signs of struggle, no weapon, no pooling. One investigator noted in an addendum, "But it's clean in a way people don't clean." When the homeowner was questioned again, their account remained unchanged. Taylor had left the house after an argument. There was no mention of any cleaning, no explanation for the fire in the backyard, and no reasonable justification for the bleached shower or burned residue. Detectives requested mobile forensic imaging to be conducted in both the bathroom and the backyard. UV scans and infrared photography confirmed that there were no visible blood patterns or drag marks. That, in itself, wasn't surprising. The key word investigators began using was containment. If something had occurred, it had been methodically managed and concealed. In this case, the absence of physical evidence had become a form of evidence. At the same time, analysts reviewed what little security footage remained from nearby homes and streets. Most recordings had already been overwritten, but one private camera, 3 houses down, captured a brief flash of light from the backyard during the early hours of April 26. The timestamp aligned precisely with the burn pattern found in the soil. The video didn't reveal anything beyond that initial flare, just the moment of ignition. By this stage, investigators had 3 core pieces of evidence: a bathroom with thoroughly clean surfaces but trace amounts of confirmed blood, a backyard containing burned synthetic and organic material, and a hallway carpet showing blood markers linking both locations. While not yet enough to press charges, the findings significantly clarified the picture. The case was officially transferred to the Homicide Division. With each new discovery, the timeline narrowed, and the margin for doubt continued to shrink. Then, on December 10, 2021, the Harris County Sheriff's Office received a call from a field technician working with a private land management crew. While clearing brush near a drainage ditch just beyond the city limits in North Harris County, the worker noticed fragments of melted fabric and wire entangled with what appeared to be partially buried, charred animal bones. Sensing something wasn't right, he immediately contacted his supervisor. Within an hour, the supervisor reached out to law enforcement. By late afternoon, crime scene investigators were on site. The ditch was remote, overgrown, isolated, and nearly invisible from the nearest road. It sat roughly 25 miles away from the Stallion Brook Lane residence. Upon arrival, the initial visual assessment confirmed the caller's suspicion. The scattered remains appeared to be human. A forensic anthropologist contracted by the county led the recovery effort. The area showed clear signs of having been burned. The remains were fragmented, brittle, and partially calcined, indicative of intense heat exposure. No full bones were recovered. Alongside the bone shards, investigators found melted zippers, deformed grommets likely from athletic clothing, and blackened shoelace eyelets near the debris. Plastic components had warped from the heat. It wasn't a large amount of evidence, but it was enough. The remains were sent to the Harris County Institute of Forensic Sciences, where forensic odontologists examined the maxillary structure and remaining dental fragments. After 12 days of analysis and comparison, the lab confirmed a match. Dental records identified the body as Taylor Pomaski. Nearly 8 months had passed since her disappearance. The confirmation immediately shifted the scope of the investigation. Now officially a homicide case, detectives re-examined every piece of existing evidence. Scene samples, lab results, and digital records, with new urgency and focus. They also had a clearer understanding of where the disposal had taken place. Though remote and rugged, the recovery site offered tactical advantages for concealment. It was obscured from the road, lacked surveillance coverage, and featured soft ground. Ideal conditions for hiding something meant never to be found. The body hadn't been buried deeply. Whoever left it there either lacked the time or means to dig a proper grave. The burn appeared rushed, unfinished, and uneven. Due to the severe condition of the remains, pathologists were unable to determine an exact cause of death. There were no ligature marks, no bullet fragments, and no definitive signs of blunt force trauma. Although the skull was fractured, it remained unclear whether the break occurred before or after death. The final autopsy summary offered only one cautious line: homicidal violence cannot be excluded. Investigators overlaid burn pattern data from the backyard with combustion analysis from the dump site, but the time gap made a direct chemical match impossible. Instead, they turned to geographic profiling software and cell tower records from April. When they mapped out activity across both locations, they found a key detail. Approximately 12 hours after Taylor's last confirmed sighting, a cell tower ping from a device linked to her boyfriend placed him in close proximity to the remote disposal site. Though there were no exact GPS coordinates, tower triangulation narrowed the location to within a 2-mile radius, close enough to encompass the ditch. But it wasn't just the discovery of Taylor's remains that changed the course of the case. It was the convergence of two key sites: a residence scrubbed clean with chemicals and a remote location where burned human remains were found. Both were linked by cell phones that moved between them, a lack of alibi, and conflicting witness accounts. As one detective summarized, "We didn't get a confession. We uncovered infrastructure. Actions taken to conceal a crime that no one ever reported." In the following weeks, the district attorney's office convened a grand jury. Despite the absence of a murder weapon, a confirmed cause of death, or any eyewitnesses, they had a body, behavior that defied innocent explanation, and forensic evidence that fit together too well to ignore. Pressure on the case began to build rapidly. Once Taylor Pomaski's remains were formally identified, her body parts were returned to her family. At her mother's request, a private ceremony was held. The public was informed only through a brief press release, which confirmed both the identification and the case's reclassification as a homicide. A quiet, overgrown field that had remained untouched for months had finally revealed the truth. The discovery of Taylor's remains marked a major turning point in the investigation. Detectives could no longer rely solely on behavioral patterns or circumstantial signs of foul play. They now had undeniable physical evidence of death. The next step was proving who was responsible and how it happened. Investigators issued a subpoena for historical location data tied to all of Kevin Ware Jr.'s mobile devices. He was Taylor's boyfriend and the last confirmed person to see her alive. When the data came back, it provided a highly detailed geolocation timeline, with hundreds of data points covering the day Taylor disappeared and the days that followed. The pattern stood out clearly. From late afternoon on April 25th until the early hours of April 26th, Kevin Ware Jr.'s phone remained stationary at the Stallion Brook Lane address. No movement, no interruptions. Then, at 6:13 a.m. on April 26th, the phone began to move. It first traveled west, then turned north, eventually stopping near a rural area off a service road in an unincorporated part of Harris County, not officially part of any city. That location was just 0.7 miles from the ditch where Taylor's remains were later recovered. The phone stayed in that area for 22 minutes before returning along the same route. It was the only visit to that location recorded in the surrounding months. On its own, the data wasn't enough to bring charges. But with no alternative explanation and burn residue found at both the home and the ditch site, the stop became a crucial anchor point in the prosecution's timeline. Investigators re-interviewed witnesses who had attended the gathering on April 25th. Some declined to speak again, while others repeated earlier statements. There had been tension, and Taylor had clearly appeared distressed. One witness recalled something new. Behind a closed door, the argument between Taylor and her boyfriend had escalated. Another mentioned seeing the homeowner the following morning, just after sunrise, using a power washer on the back patio. At the time, it hadn't seemed unusual, but in light of the emerging timeline, it was now considered part of a deliberate attempt to clean up and possibly destroy evidence. Around the same time, jailhouse informants began to come forward. While in pretrial detention on unrelated drug and weapons charges, Kevin Ware was reportedly overheard making vague statements about getting rid of a problem and cleaning it up well. Though the language lacked direct references and specific details, multiple inmates described hearing similar phrases. On their own, these statements weren't admissible as direct evidence, but they reinforced the broader narrative of premeditation and concealment. By mid-2022, the district attorney's office had begun outlining a formal indictment strategy. Despite the absence of a murder weapon, confession, or eyewitness, the combined weight of digital, forensic, and behavioral evidence built a compelling case. The grand jury convened for the first time on July 26th. Prosecutors presented cell tower data linking where to the disposal site, forensic analysis showing chemical and burn residue matches between the backyard and the ditch, trace amounts of Taylor's blood in the home, inconsistent witness accounts, evidence of post-party cleanup, and jailhouse testimony suggesting implied guilt. On July 28th, the grand jury returned an indictment, 1 count of murder and 1 count of tampering with a human corpse. With that, Kevin Ware was immediately transferred from federal to state custody. In a brief public statement, Kevin Ware's legal team denied all allegations, asserting there was no direct evidence tying him to the crime and claiming the case was being fueled by media pressure rather than facts. The court issued a no-bond hold, keeping him in custody while the case proceeded. One of the most significant discoveries came from an encrypted messaging app found on a second phone belonging to the suspect. Although the device had been factory reset before police recovered it, forensic analysts were able to retrieve fragments of deleted data from cached memory. Among the recovered texts was one chilling line: "It's done just like we planned." There was no timestamp, no visible recipient, and no confirmed context. But the message appeared in the phone's memory around the same time Taylor went missing, raising serious suspicion. While investigators couldn't definitively link that message to the crime, it was submitted as part of the court's evidentiary file. Still unanswered were several critical questions: the exact cause of Taylor's death, how long her body may have remained at the house, and whether anyone else had helped cover it up. But by this point, the foundation of the case was solid. One prosecutor described it as the convergence of independent anomalies, small pieces that, alone, meant little, but together created a compelling narrative. With the suspect now formally charged and awaiting trial, active fieldwork was halted. Investigators shifted their focus to trial preparation. Taylor's family was informed privately. The district attorney personally called her mother. The only public statement offered was simple but powerful: "We believe Taylor's voice is being heard, even now." With the indictment secured, the investigation entered its final phase, reconstructing the events between Taylor's last known appearance and the discovery of her partially burned remains months later in a rural ditch. That would require more than just evidence. It would require a coherent, provable timeline, a chain of events that told the story Taylor couldn't. There was a narrow window of less than 12 hours. Based on witness accounts, mobile data, and forensic findings, investigators determined that Taylor was last seen at a party in her home on the night of April 25, 2021, at approximately 11:45 p.m. Between that time and around 6:15 a.m. the next morning, several critical events likely occurred: her death, an attempted cleanup, the burning of her remains, and their disposal. Working backward from the final ping of the suspect's phone, investigators identified a brief stop in a remote part of North Harris County, the same area where Taylor's remains were eventually discovered. The phone's presence at the scene for just over 20 minutes indicated a hasty disposal rather than a premeditated burial or methodical cover-up. Back at the Stallion Brook Lane residence, forensic experts had already detected microscopic traces of blood embedded in the shower grout. Though there were no visible pools or spatter patterns, the presence of blood proteins in deep crevices strongly suggested the bathroom had been used to process biological material. Chemical analysis revealed that a high-concentration oxidizing agent, most likely bleach, had been applied 24 to 48 hours after Taylor vanished. Additional plumbing inspections uncovered irregular residue buildup, consistent with the disposal of organic waste through the drains. Sludge samples taken from the P-trap beneath both the bathroom sink and shower revealed the presence of tissue fragments, too degraded for DNA testing but consistent with decomposed organic material. Investigators concluded these findings likely pointed to the cleanup and handling of human remains after death. Along the hallway leading to the backyard exit, no visible blood or drag marks were found, but testing revealed a faint hemoglobin signature embedded in the carpet padding beneath the surface. When consulted, a forensic pathologist told the DA's office that if the victim had died or become incapacitated in the bathroom, the fastest route to dispose of the body would have been through the hallway and out the rear door. Soil tests from the backyard supported this theory. They revealed lingering signs of fire exposure, including polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, PAHs, and calcium phosphate, both byproducts of burning organic matter. These same compounds had also been found in the remote ditch where Taylor's remains were recovered, though the samples couldn't be matched directly to the bone fragments. Investigators believed the initial attempt to destroy evidence had begun in the backyard but was likely abandoned, possibly due to the odor, poor visibility, or time constraints. This theory led to deeper scrutiny of the suspect's digital activity. Metadata from deleted files on his secondary mobile device revealed communication activity between 3:15 a.m. and 5 a.m. on April 26th. Analysts identified that the suspect had been exchanging encrypted messages with a known associate, someone with a documented criminal history and direct links to the suspect's inner circle. The timestamps on the encrypted messages revealed a coordinated exchange, but after 5:04 a.m., the communication abruptly stopped. No further texts were sent, and shortly after, the suspect's phone went offline. A forensic anthropologist reviewed the condition of Taylor's remains to assist in reconstructing the events. While some bones were fully calcined, others showed little to no thermal damage. The lack of heat fracturing on joint surfaces indicated an uneven, open-air burn, consistent with a hastily built backyard fire rather than a controlled, high-temperature incineration. This supported the theory that the disposal attempt was improvised and incomplete, aligning with the evidence found at the house. To finalize the timeline, prosecutors turned to behavioral analysis. Investigators noted that the suspect never called 911, never reported Taylor missing, and ignored repeated calls and texts from her family and friends in the days that followed. One subtle but significant detail came from a neighbor's security camera: the faint sound of a car door slamming and a vehicle leaving the neighborhood at exactly 6:05 a.m. The same window in which the suspect's phone began its route toward the eventual disposal site. There was only audio, no video footage. The sound of a car door closing and a vehicle driving off coincided precisely with the suspect's first phone ping near the ditch minutes later. The final case reconstruction came from layering different forms of evidence: spatial movement, chemical residue, degraded biological traces, and digital metadata. Though there was no single defining moment, the chain of events was unmistakable: confrontation, violence, cleanup, failed concealment, and eventual disposal. The theory didn't need a clear motive. It only required proof of opportunity, access, concealment, and control, all of which were present. Within the investigative team, the emotional strain was real. The delay in reporting Taylor missing had closed vital windows for evidence collection. But despite that, the fragmented clues, when aligned, formed a coherent narrative suggesting the crime, the cover-up, and the disposal all occurred in a single, deliberate cycle. The fire in the field wasn't the beginning. It was the final act meant to erase everything before it. It was the final act of a story that began behind a closed bathroom door. The case formally concluded on April 28, 2023, nearly 2 years after Taylor Pomaski vanished from her home in Spring, Texas. There was no jury verdict. Instead, it ended with a plea agreement. Kevin Ware Jr., a former NFL tight end and the last known person to see her alive, pleaded guilty in Harris County Court to murder and tampering with a human corpse. The judge sentenced him to 30 years in state prison. No trial took place. No witnesses took the stand. Just paperwork, then silence. The decision not to proceed with a trial wasn't made lightly. Despite the weight of circumstantial and forensic evidence, the prosecution still lacked a confirmed cause of death. No weapon was recovered, no confession was recorded, and no one had witnessed the killing firsthand. Yet the digital trail, forensic evidence, and post-crime behavior painted a complete and damning narrative. Faced with the risk of a mistrial or prolonged appeals due to the lack of a confirmed cause of death, prosecutors chose a plea deal that guaranteed a conviction. As part of the agreement, Ware's defense team waived all rights to appeal and secured a concurrent sentencing arrangement. In return, the court received a formal admission of guilt. The sentencing itself was brief. Taylor's family, present but silent, declined to give a victim impact statement. The Harris County Sheriff's Office officially closed the case following the court proceedings. Later that day, the conviction and sentencing were announced in a short press release. No further details were released. For the investigators who had worked the case for over a year and a half, the outcome wasn't about closure. It was about facts, not emotion. Still, some of the most important questions remained unanswered. Weeks before her death, Taylor had contacted police. She confided in friends about feeling afraid. Her relationship showed clear signs of being high risk, marked by volatility and controlling behavior, but none of it triggered immediate legal action. In hindsight, many of the warning signs that were overlooked could have prompted intervention much earlier. The April 7th 911 call, the skipped appointments, the sudden silence. Individually, they didn't set off alarms. But together, they formed a pattern that became obvious only after it was too late. Taylor's case wasn't unique. Across the U.S., the legal system often falls short when it comes to protecting women in abusive relationships. Without visible injuries or formal complaints, many cases are treated as non-criminal, even when the signs of danger are there. Taylor's case became one of many tragic examples where early warning signs weren't enough to trigger legal protection. In the weeks following the sentencing, numerous local organizations focused on domestic violence prevention used her story to raise awareness. Her timeline, marked by digital silence, sudden isolation, and undocumented fear, was included in training materials and seminars. Her name appeared on flyers, resource guides, and quiet presentations in school gyms, serving as both a lesson and a warning. Family and friends held a private memorial at home. There were no speeches or formal statements. In a quiet moment, Taylor's mother told a reporter, "She kept trying to leave. She just didn't get far." With that, the court formally closed the murder case and entered it into the record. The plea agreement was recorded in the public docket, confirming that Kevin Ware would serve a minimum of 25 years before becoming eligible for parole, a possibility only when he'd be well into his 70s. In the days before she vanished, Taylor had written a draft email titled, "In case you need to know." It was never sent. Only one line remained undeleted. "I didn't fall off the radar." Beneath it, a second sentence lingered like a whisper in the dark. "They pushed me. The system finally listened. But it was far too late." If you found this case fascinating, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. We post crime case videos every night. Until next time, stay sharp, stay vigilant.